Today we examine the case of Gerald Galago and Charlene Galago, a criminal pair active in California, Nevada, and Oregon between 1978 and 1980. They were labeled by the press as the sex slave killers, a term reflecting the prolonged captivity and sexual violence inflicted on the victims. Most historical records confirm 10 kills, though some sources debate whether the total may be 11. Gerald's early life was marked by severe instability. His father was sentenced to death in Mississippi for murder, and Gerald reportedly did not learn of this until adolescence. His mother worked as a sex worker, and multiple accounts describe persistent neglect, physical abuse, and sexual victimization by adults in his environment. By age 10, he had committed burglary. By 12, he had sexually assaulted a child and was sent to a youth detention facility. Charlene's background differed in structure, but also reflected instability. She began using alcohol and amphetamines as young as 13 and developed a reputation for sexual impulsivity. She was married multiple times before meeting Gerald and reportedly attempted suicide shortly before their relationship began. Their partnership would become central to the crimes that followed.
From 1978 to 1980, Gerald and Charlene Galago carried out a calculated series of abductions and murders across California, Nevada, and the Oregon coast. Their earliest suspected victim, 16-year-old Sandra K. Butler, is sometimes dated to June 26, 1978, in Nevada, though her inclusion brings the debated total to 10 or possibly 11 victims. On September 11, 1978, in Sacramento, California, 16-year-old Kippy Jacqueline Vaught and 17-year-old Rhonda Lee Scheffler were abducted. Nearly a year later, on June 24, 1979, at the Washoe County Fair in Reno, Nevada, 14-year-old Brenda Lynn Judd and 13-year-old Sandra K. Coley were taken. The crimes escalated in 1980. On April 24th in Citrus Heights, California, 17-year-olds Stacy Ann Riddicken and Karen Shipman Twiggs were kidnapped from a mall area. In June 1980, 21-year-old Lynn Teresa Aguilar, who was pregnant at the time, was abducted while hitchhiking along the Oregon coast and later killed. On July 17, 1980, 34-year-old Virginia Maxine Mochel was abducted from West Sacramento. The final confirmed abduction occurred on November 1, 1980, at the Arden Fair in Sacramento, where 22-year-old Craig Raymond Miller and his 21-year-old fiancée, Mary Elizabeth Sowers, were kidnapped. Both were later killed. Across each crime, the pattern remained chillingly consistent. Charlene would approach victims in public places, presenting herself as harmless and friendly. Gerald would then assert control, forcing victims into their vehicle. The captives were transported to isolated rural locations where the murders took place. On November 17, 1980, after a witness from the Arden Fair abduction recorded their license plate number, the pair were arrested in Omaha, Nebraska, bringing an end to a 2-year-long killing spree.
Following arrest, both defendants initially denied involvement. Then 2 months after the arrest, Charlene had a baby while awaiting trial in jail. She pled for visitation rights again and again to hold her baby, but was denied 3 times. At that point, she accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against Gerald. She admitted her role in the murders of the couple's last 3 victims, but also confessed her involvement as an accomplice in 7 other homicides with Gerald that the police weren't even aware they were responsible for. Charlene's plea bargain reduced her prison sentence to 16 years and 8 months in prison. As a result, Gerald was convicted in both California and Nevada for multiple murders and related offenses. He received death sentences in both cases. Although one sentence was temporarily overturned on appeal, it was later reinstated. He died of cancer in 2002 while incarcerated in Nevada's state prison prior to execution. When Charlene took the stand, she said she acted as an accomplice out of fear of him and his emotional control. And after serving her prison term for second-degree murder and related offenses, she was released in 1997 and reportedly changed her name to her maiden name, Charlene Williams. In interviews with the press, When she was released from prison at age 41, she recounted how charming and gentlemanly Gallego was when she met him on a blind date set up through an acquaintance. He didn't even try to kiss her, and he sent flowers the next morning. She has also said that after 2 decades of counseling, that is how she sees herself, as a victim rather than a criminal. She also says what happened to her could happen to any woman who is physically and emotionally abused by a manipulative man.
Psychiatric evaluations presented during trial offer insight into Gerald Gallego's psychological profile. Defense experts suggested he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from childhood abuse, organic brain dysfunction supported by neurological imaging, depression and episodic delusional thinking, and paraphilic disorder involving coercive sexual fantasies. From a criminological perspective, his case is often discussed within the cycle of violence hypothesis, which proposes that early victimization increases risk for later violent behavior. However, it is critical to emphasize that trauma does not determine criminality. The overwhelming majority of abuse survivors do not become violent offenders. Charlene's psychological framing was more contested. She was described as highly intelligent but unstable, with long-standing substance abuse issues. Some legal analysts characterized her as exhibiting symptoms consistent with battered woman syndrome, arguing that prolonged coercive control influenced her participation. Others suggested antisocial personality traits. Modern forensic psychology would likely evaluate her through frameworks of coercive control, dependency pathology, and trauma bonding, concepts that were less formally recognized in the early 1980s courts.
There's a great deal of complexity in trying to understand what happened and why. Gerald's extensive history of abuse, both sexual and psychological, clearly shaped his early development. His childhood was marked by neglect, instability, exposure to violence, and criminal behavior at a young age. Over time, these factors escalated into severe antisocial conduct, sexual aggression, and ultimately serial murder. Neurological impairment and repeated abuse may have also contributed to his lack of impulse control and distorted thinking patterns. Charlene presents a far more ethically complicated case. Evidence suggests that she experienced manipulation, coercive control, and possibly some form of psychological dependence within the relationship. Yet, she was never a passive bystander. She actively lured victims, gained their trust, and facilitated their captivity and rape. Even if fear influenced her compliance, she participated in actions that directly enabled violence. Ultimately, while psychological context is essential for understanding these criminal behaviors, it cannot ever replace accountability. Both individuals played roles in these crimes, and the lasting impact will remain with the victims and the families forever.